guys, and welcome to Card Chat number 5. And today we're going to be talking about what Square Enix can do to really make Final Fantasy TCG take off. Now, my random task of the day is I bought some random Wave 1 non-foil errata from a guy in Australia, so I'll just be doing that while I'm talking. Now, if you followed my other videos or my website, FFTCGauthority.com, you know that I think Final Fantasy TCG has a lot of untapped potential. At the same time, you know that I also believe that this game is not doing as well as it should, although that's to my benefit for now because I'm trying to stock up on these cards, and the less people know about them, the cheaper it is for me, because obviously once it takes off, it's going to become cost prohibitive to get a lot of Wave 1 foils or Cloud A001s or whatever it is. So I'm stocking right now in the hopes that the popularity takes off in the future and the prices appreciate accordingly. Now, of course, for those of you watching, don't kind of quote me on that. There's a good chance it will never happen, so invest with caution. But Square Enix, I think, has done a really terrible job about promoting this game, and this is not just my opinion. A lot of the players in the community complain about the same thing, especially the ones who have been around since the launch days where they saw kind of the distribution disaster and what happened when Square Enix didn't kind of fulfill the crazy demand in the beginning of the game, and how detrimental that was to kind of FFTCG's growth. When no one was able to get a hold of Opus 1 boxes, people were charging $300 for them, all the players got pissed off, and a lot of not only players, but LGS owners gave up on the game completely. So I'm going to go over 3 things today that I think Square Enix can do to really make this game take off. Number 1 is change the marketing focus. Currently, there's very little marketing to speak of to begin with, but it's primarily targeted towards current TCG players, like players who are playing Magic, Pokemon, whatever, and I don't think that's a good idea. Magic the Gathering has a stranglehold on the industry. If you watched my last video, you kind of heard me reference the term wallet sharing. These card games are just too damn expensive to kind of fully play multiples of them unless you have an enormous amount of money. Typically, you're going to play whatever everyone else is playing, and sadly, or whatever, like depending on your own point of view, that game is Magic the Gathering. And guess what? Most of the TCG players out there, they've already heard of Final Fantasy TCG. You're not going to get any more customers by marketing towards that crowd. If you're a TCG player, you know FFTCG exists, and if you're not buying them already, it's because you have no interest in doing so, or you tried it out and you didn't like it, whatever the case may be. It's kind of a wasted avenue to do kind of direct your marketing efforts towards. What you do need to do is, and I'm saying this because just recently I kind of got a couple of more people into FFTCG, you need to market towards the collectors. So shift your marketing focus, and instead of targeting TCG players, target Final Fantasy fans. Like, I don't know why that's so difficult. Like, you want to target the people who don't know that this card game exists, and there's so many of them. That's what I keep saying. There's a huge number of Final Fantasy fans who would collect this card game if only they knew it existed, but they just don't. They've never heard of it. And every time I have a diehard Final Fantasy fan, I tell them there's a card game, they're all super interested in finding out more about it, but Square Enix has done a really terrible job of kind of leveraging that untapped market. They keep going after TCG players. They already know about the game. They're not going to buy in unless the game grows more in popularity. And the best way to do that is to focus your efforts on the people who don't know about the game yet, which are the collectors. And if a lot of Final Fantasy fans start coming into the card game, what's it going to do? It's going to kind of increase the market of the cards. It's going to have a lot more cards sold. Square Enix is going to have the money to kind of devote more time and effort into spending more money on marketing, advertising, all that stuff. And the thing is, not everyone who's a collector is going to want to actually play the card game, but that's okay. If you find 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 new customers that previously didn't know about the card game before, simple math says at least some proportion of those people will be interested in playing the card game, and those will be players that are new additions to the scene that weren't there before. And that's what you really want to focus on, growing the community, growing the number of people buying these cards, instead of kind of investing your time into a demographic that already isn't that interested. So that goes to number 2, which is improving the damn advertising. I mean, there's a reason why huge multinational corporations spend so much money on advertising. Like, people never seem to get when they look at like companies like Fortune 500 companies, whatever, Microsoft, Google, Pfizer, whatever it is, and you look at their marketing budgets, and sometimes it's in the billions of dollars, if not, at least hundreds of millions. And they're like, why would you spend that much time on just television ads and magazine ads, blah, blah, blah? It's because it works. It's not because they're retarded and you just want to throw away money for no reason. Like, granted, some advertisements are bad, but the principle works. When you let people know about a product, more people buy it. That's just a reality. Whether or not you believe in advertising or you think it's a waste of time, it's a proven fact that without advertising in business, your product will never grow unless your product is so good that it travels just by word of mouth. And guess what? That's very rare, and that's usually only for niche products where it's something very new and revolutionary. This card game is not that. I mean, there's nothing new or revolutionary about this card game other than the fact that it's a cool product for Final Fantasy fans that didn't exist in the past. So they need to really refocus their advertising and kind of spend more money on it. In the United States, there's I forget his name, there's one guy who handles all of it, and that's not sustainable for long-term growth. Right now, Square has kind of pigeonholed themselves into lackluster growth. And let me tell you one simple thing that Square Enix can do that will, I think, overnight increase the demand for Final Fantasy cards by maybe threefold, fourfold, maybe even tenfold. And the funny thing is, they've actually done this before already. So, sorry about that, I knocked over my camera. But anyways, I was talking about what Square Enix can do to kind of really increase the demand for these cards by an order of magnitude, and that's to include a promo card with one of the Final Fantasy game releases. Now, what you'll say to me is, hey, they already did that before. They kind of included the cards with the Dissidia promos, and that barely did a thing. And my response to that is, how many of you guys actually played Dissidia? They included this card game, this not very well-known card game, with a video game that's even less known, and then they were shocked when it didn't skyrocket the sales overnight. Of course it wouldn't. No one's playing Dissidia. I mean, the card game itself is not bad. The last one, the video game itself is not bad, although the last time I played it was for the PSP, and that alone made it not willing for me to try any of the future ones. Not so much because it was a bad game, but because it wasn't really my style. If you're not really into fighting games and you want more RPG things, it doesn't matter that it's Final Fantasy, you probably weren't that interested. But imagine they had included those Dissidia promos with Final Fantasy 15. Imagine how much more of a difference that would have made. I think Dissidia sold not even 100,000 copies. All the numbered Final Fantasies always sell 1, 2, 3 million copies. So right away, just by simple math, you're exposing FFTCG to so many more potential customers if you include the cards with a numbered primary Final Fantasy game. And what happens? Most people will open the game, see their cards, and say, what the hell is this? And some of them will say, I don't give a shit, I have no interest in trading cards, and throw them in the trash. So what? Those people were never going to get into Final Fantasy TCG anyway. They probably weren't going to get into any TCG. But there's going to be a rather large subset of people who are going to see these cards and say, wow, I really had no idea this even existed. What are these cards? Can I sell them on eBay? They're going to start doing research and say, oh, I had no idea that this card game even existed. This is kind of cool. Let me do some research into it. And whether that's 20% of the people who get the cards, 10%, 5%, it doesn't really matter. If 1 million or 2 million people are buying the game and just 5% of them actually have some interest in it, well, then the reality is that that's going to grow the overall FFTCG community by an order of magnitude. Right now, the main Reddit for FFTCG doesn't even have 10,000 subscribers in it. It's still a very small niche card game. And the problem, the reason for that is that no one even really knows that this card game exists. Not even all the Final Fantasy fans. Square Enix has to make sure that 100% of Final Fantasy fans knows that the game exists. At least knows about it. They might not buy it. The reality is not everyone who likes the video games is going to want to play trading card games or collect them. But the thing is, by having such a large proportion of them not even know that this game exists, you're really kind of, it's just very detrimental to the growth of the game. Like, you really need to make sure everyone's aware, and if they're still not interested, you can even come up with an exit strategy and say, hey, everyone who loves Final Fantasy, we're 100% sure that they know about Final Fantasy TCG, and still only 0.001% of them are buying. From a business perspective, at least that tells them, hey, the card game's not worth it. Maybe we should cut our losses and get out. But they can't even do that. I'm saying there's such a huge untapped potential that they're still not going after them, that they'll never even know that for a fact. So number 2 is to improve the advertising, have TV ads, advertise on, actually TV ads are probably not so good for FFTCG, but focus advertising towards specific Reddit channels devoted to trading card games or Final Fantasy, include promo cards with Final Fantasy games, and also at Final Fantasy events, make sure that there's a presence for FFTCG, and I think that'll do a tremendous amount of good for FFTCG's growth and really increase the demand, and also lead to an influx of a whole new number of players that will really kind of increase the scene and kind of keep this game afloat. And so let's do a quick recap. Number 1 was changing the focus to collectors instead of players. Step number 2 was improving the advertising and directing the advertising in better ways. And now let's go into number 3. And number 3 is to make a digital version of this card game. Now, I've said in videos in the past that I was very upset to learn that the digital card game that Square Enix has been going on, where I was so convinced that it was FFTCG because they said it was a fusion of the digital and physical, which makes no sense because now it's some crappy digital-only game that's a completely different card game. But an online-only version is mandatory for FFTCG to grow. And with Square Enix's video game prowess at making and designing like massive scale games, I have no idea why they haven't done it, because making a video game for FFTCG would be so simple compared to the other things that they've already done. The programming would be a joke compared to things like FF15 or whatever. And the thing is, they want to compete with Magic the Gathering, but they haven't learned a lesson from all the other TCGs that have tried to take Magic the Gathering head on. You cannot beat them. They've been the king for almost 30 years now. Everyone who is really into local play is going to focus on Magic the Gathering. The guys who love going to the LGS 2, 3, 4 times a day and playing other people, they're going to focus on Magic the Gathering. There's just too many people. They're too invested in it. You can't suddenly convert hundreds of millions of, maybe not hundred, millions of MTG players to a completely different card game who have already invested thousands into MTG and expect them to switch. Even if your card game is better, like Force of Will and all these other games, like they all have interesting mechanics, and you can argue sometimes they are a superior and more balanced card game in terms of sheer rules. It never matters. Like the game is just not going to be superior enough at those levels to really convince those kind of crowds to move away from MTG. So how do you get around that? How do you kind of increase visibility for FFTCG with that being the case? And it's to make an online version. How did more companies not learn the lesson from Hearthstone? Like, why did Hearthstone do so well? Because it got people who were kind of intrigued by the idea of card games, but who were not willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on buying cards. It gave them kind of a digital avenue to play the card game, easily play with other people without going to the LGS. That's the main reason why everyone thinks FFTCG is dead, by the way, because a lot of LGSs don't carry it and they don't run the events. And the reason for that is they are businesses. It's just a lot more profitable to focus your efforts on the more popular card games like Magic the Gathering. You hold a Magic the Gathering pre-release or a tournament, people are going to show up. They might not for FFTCG. And I keep hearing people say like, I love Final Fantasy, I love Final Fantasy TCG, I love the art, but I can't find anyone to play with. And I don't know what Square Enix, it's not a problem that's just going to go away overnight. I feel like they keep thinking that suddenly there's going to be 100 people showing up at every LGS for FFTCG. It's just not happening. It's just too hard to get that initial momentum. Their best shot was with the launch of Opus 1, and they squandered that opportunity already with the supply issues. So what they really need is a digital equivalent. And I said it before, FFTCG, it's very easy to do this because each case is mapped to have a full play set of non-foils and a full set of foils. So really, you can just have a digital voucher code that when you buy a booster box, it gives you kind of a digital voucher of all the cards inside. And basically, you just type in the booster box into, or booster pack code, or whatever you want to put the code on, into an online client, and suddenly you have digital equivalents of all the cards, and you could trade them online and do whatever you want with them. But the thing it will do is it will kind of let people learn more about FFTCG, and some of the people who end up loving the game digitally will end up going to the LGS and playing. And that's kind of what Square Enix does. So anyways, to sum this up, Square Enix really needs, if they really want this card game to explode, they need to make a digital version of this card game. I guarantee you that the user base will explode by a factor of 10, maybe 100 overnight. And I think Square sometimes feels that digital sales will kind of encroach upon the sales of the physical product. I don't think that's the case. No one's been seeing that for Magic the Gathering, and they've had a online client for, I don't even know, like 10 years now. So that is the only way that Square Enix can hope to grow the user community to a kind of sustainable level. You need a digital client eventually. So anyways, those are my three main points. Step 1, change the direction of your advertising towards Final Fantasy fans to get new players. Step 2, improve the quality of the advertising itself. Put promo cards in the right games. Put advertisements in the right places. Number 3 is to make a digital card game equivalent to really kind of keep up the user base that's struggling to find people to play with. Make sure that people who want to invest into learning this card game can easily play, because currently they can't. Even the people who really are interested in Final Fantasy TCG, they just can't find people to play with. And unless that's fixed, this card game will never explode. So anyways, that's my card chat. I hope this one wasn't particularly helpful, but I hope it was interesting to some of you guys. And subscribe if you want to see more talks like this in the future. Take care. Have a great day. Peace.